What's good, G? It's Michael, aka Victor here, and we're going to do a little time travel. Okay. So, question everything and do your own research. So, I mentioned before how we're going to show how some of these texts that we're looking at now are based on older, more ancient texts. We're going to do a little time traveling on that. So, thanks to Wikipedia and Google for the links here. And I'm not saying that Wikipedia and Google are the be all end all of information. It's just that they're public sources that we can all freely look at and research. So, we're going to get into it. So let's time travel, shall we? Now, the further you go back in time, the murkier it gets, but this is what we got to go by at this point. Okay. So I created a general timeline to the left to kind of give you a reference of how far back we're going. So this red line is where we are now. And you can see to the left, it goes from 0 to 4,500. That's total years in the past. On the right side, you see it goes from 2000 to 0 and from 0 to 2,500. So that's going to be splitting the time into common era and before common era. Okay. So we're right here, 2020. We'll kind of talk through this. So don't be intimidated by all the numbers. Now, as you go back further in time, scholars look at it from common era and before common era because they don't look at it as AD after the death of Christ or BC before Christ, because a lot of them don't believe the literal figure of Jesus Christ, right? So you'll see BC or BCE before Common Era, and you'll see Common Era, CE or AD, which is after death, right? So just wanted to kind of clear that up, right? So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to go back 4,322 years ago to the pyramid texts, right? Pyramid texts are the oldest ancient Egyptian funerary texts. And when you look at one of the oldest, writings, this is what comes up, okay? 2300 BCE. Now, the interesting thing about these texts is what's written in them is called, among other things, there's what's called Ma'at. And it is a ancient Egyptian concept of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. And it was also personified as a goddess, okay? Interesting thing about Ma'at is there's what's called the 42 negative confessions, right? Basically, what someone would be able to confess to say that they lived a good life, right? A code of morality, if you will. And you can see some correlations between the 42 negative confessions and the 10 commandments. And that's a rabbit hole that you can look at yourself. But there are definitely correlations there that are interesting. So we'll get a little further down the line, 4,122 years ago, or 2100 BCE, Epic of Gilgamesh. Interesting thing about Epic of Gilgamesh, it's an epic poem, and it's one of the earliest surviving pieces of literature. And there's a flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'll just quote this. The Genesis flood narrative matches the one in Gilgamesh so closely that few doubt that it derives from the Mesopotamian account. So the flood story in Genesis mimics the Epic of Gilgamesh flood story. And the Genesis flood story follows the tale, and this is another quote, point by point in the same order, even when the story permits other alternatives. So if it wasn't a plagiarization, they could have made the story have a few more twists and turns in the biblical version of it, but they didn't. So it's just, again, another rabbit hole that you can look into. Then we fast forward a little bit, 3,422 years ago, 1400 BCE, got the Luxor Temple. Luxor Temple has proverbs that are written in there, such as man know thyself and the body is the house of God. There's other ones there, and I couldn't substantiate all of them because there's not much data on that I saw, but it's something I like to see in person and kind of see these things are really there. But I thought those were interesting because you see those things in later texts, okay? And then around that time, you got Moses. Moses was born in Egypt. I don't know if you guys knew that, but does that make him Egyptian? 3,413 years ago, supposedly, 1391 BCE. And he is giving, he's given credit for, writing the Torah, And the final Torah, which is interesting, was the oldest one that we have is 2,561 years ago, or 539 BCE. And that's a long time after Moses, right? And then 2,372 years ago, and this is the formation of the Bible that we're kind of looking at, right? Because some people think the Bible is the first book ever written for some reason. Not everyone, just some people. The Greek Old Testament, or Septuagint, is, again, the Greek Old Testament, not just Torah, but the Old Testament. And that's 2,372 years ago, or 350 BCE, okay? Then we fast forward a little more. Then we got the Codex Sinaiticus, 1697 years ago, or 325 CE. So now we've crossed over from BCE to CE. And that's one of the oldest surviving complete Bibles that we have, right? Fast forward a little bit more. Got the King James Version. And the interesting thing, 411 years ago, 1611 CE in the Common Era, King James Version was commissioned in 1604, published in 1611 by sponsorship of King James. And this is the Bible that has the books that a lot of people were, more familiar with: 39 Old Testament and 27 New Testament books, right? And King James is a character in itself. The interesting thing is, after that was commissioned and it was published, 8 years afterwards, supposedly the first Africans arrived in Virginia. And it's interesting that I'm pretty sure those first Africans were taught some teachings out of this King James Version Bible and didn't have privy to the information before that, or that some of their teachings predated these writings by thousands of years. So I'm sure people here don't know that as well. So that's why you have to question everything and you have to do your own research. Everything that I've looked at and just showed you, you can look up for yourself, and you should do more deeper diving than I'm doing here, because I try to make this quick, but there's a lot of rabbit holes down there. And yeah, look at the 42 negative confessions of my and compare that to the 10 Commandments. And yeah, do your own research. There's a lot more out there. And this is just a thumbnail sketch of what's going on. Just kind of wanted to show you a little timeline. All right, y'all. Peace.